Hi, how are you doing? Today I want to talk about a work that really needs no introduction. It's the Inferno, Dante's Inferno. It's really one of the great masterpieces of world literature and medieval literature, and it's the first part of a three-part epic poem called the Divine Comedy, which is the Inferno, which is hell, then purgatory, then paradise. And it was written in the early to mid 14th century by Dante Alighieri. Um, and it really is just a truly timeless work that works on so many levels. It can be interpreted like all the greatest works of art. It really can be interpreted on multiple different levels. You can read it allegorically, you can read it literally, you can read it as simply as just a good adventure story, as a horror story, as a love story, theologically, really any way you want to look at it. It's just truly incredible. And the Inferno is obviously the part that most people are familiar with, maybe because there's sort of a sensationalistic aspect where he's talking about hell and all the punishments of hell in this extremely unique way that he envisions hell that sort of differs from anything biblical. It really is just a product of his own powers of invention and his own imagination. I'm sure if you've taken any, remedial or any English course in college or any literature course, you know about the nine circles of hell, and each circle has its own sort of ironic punishment for whatever the person's sin in question happened to be, whether it's gluttony or wrath or greed or treachery. And it really is just incredibly imaginative. It's a work that really has fascinated me for as long as I've known about it. I read the whole Divine Comedy a very, very long time ago, and most people don't really bother with Purgatory and Paradise, I think, unless you're an academic or a scholar, which I'm definitely not. The Inferno is definitely the one that's the most discussed, the most widely read, but you really have to take all three parts as a whole to appreciate the full scale and scope, which is something just truly sublime and epic in every sense of the word. That it feels like you're going on some kind of spiritual journey. And being Jewish, obviously, not every aspect of the story aligns with my own beliefs. It's medieval Roman Catholicism, but I don't think that really matters in the end. I think it's something that can be appreciated on many different levels, like I said, by anyone, no matter what your, regardless of your religious beliefs or lack of religious beliefs. It doesn't really matter. It's simply a masterwork of literature. And I just want to share my thoughts on the first few cantos. Each section is called a canto, and in the Inferno there are how many cantos? 20, uh, 29, nine, or 30, 30, 31, 32, 34, 34 cantos, I believe, in the Inferno. And I just want to read some of the first few cantos that kind of open the story, because I feel like those are some of the most fascinating. So basically, one of the aspects of this work that really intrigues me is the way that the hell that's envisioned in the Inferno can be viewed as both a literal and a figurative space. It's a literal hell. It's literally a biblical hell, but there's also more of a less literal interpretation. It's sort of the hell that any of us can be going through in our lives when we're dealing with tribulations or troubles or problems. And that's part of what makes the work resonate so much, and that's part of what makes it so powerful to me. Is any of us can relate to the feeling of, at some point in our lives, I'm sure most of us have been able to would be able to relate to the feeling of, I'm going through hell right now. And I feel like this book kind of speaks to that, like almost 1,000 years, 800, 900 years after it was published. It still is something that resonates, which is definitely not something you can say about most works of medieval literature. It doesn't feel like a dry tome. It feels like something that hasn't lost any of its freshness or any of its power. And the whole concept itself of these nine circles of hell is something that's so ingrained in the popular imagination that a lot of people just take it for granted and they don't even realize where it originates from. That's how impactful it's been. And there's also another aspect of it that fascinates me is there's kind of this feeling of just weirdness of going through hell, and some of the not just the punishments but also just the characters, the creatures, the monsters. There's just this very weird, a lot of weirdness, which I just find very interesting. I mean, you have the Cerberus and the Minotaur and Garion, which is this kind of creepy lizard thing. So that is something that I just find very intriguing. That it just gets flat out weird at times, and that's always fun, you know. So anyway, for the context of how the story starts, it starts with Dante. It opens when Dante is about 37 years old. I think three score years and 10, which I believe is around 37. And he finds himself in this kind of scary, dark wilderness where he's sort of woken up and realized that he's just gone astray and lost himself. And obviously, it's sort of it can be read literally, but also um, allegorically that he's just gone astray and lost his path in life, which is something that I'm sure many of us can relate to and understand. And it starts off um, with in Easter, the Easter season, which is where all this kind of religious Christian symbolism comes into play. And I'll just let the story speak for itself. Midway in our life's journey, I went astray from the straight road and woke to find myself alone in a dark wood. How shall I say what wood that was? I never saw so drear, so rank, so arduous a wilderness. Its very memory gives a shape to fear. Death could scarce be more bitter than that place, but since it came to good, I will recount all that I found revealed there by God's grace. How I came to it I cannot rightly say, so drugged and loose with sleep had I become when I first wandered there from the true way. But at the far end of that valley of evil, whose maze had sapped my very heart with fear, I found myself before a little hill, and lifted up my eyes. Its shoulders glowed already with the sweet rays of that planet whose virtue leads men straight on every road. And the shining strengthened me against the fright whose agony had racked the lake of my heart through all the terrors of that piteous night. Just as a swimmer who with his last breath flounders ashore from perilous seas might turn to memorize the wide water of his death, so did I turn, my soul still fugitive, from death's surviving image to stare down the past that none had ever left alive. And there I lay to rest from my heart's race, till calm and breath returned to me, then rose and pushed up that dead slope at such a pace each footfall rose above the last, and lo, almost at the beginning of the rise, I faced a spotted leopard, all tremor and flow, and gaudy pelt, and it would not pass, but stood, so blocking my every turn, that time and again I was on the verge of turning back to the wood. This fell at the first widening of the dawn, as the sun was climbing Aries with those stars that rode with him to light the new creation. Thus the holy hour and the sweet season of commemoration did much to arm my fear of that bright murderous beast with their good omen. Yet not so much but what I shook with dread at sight of a great lion that broke upon me, raging with hunger, its enormous head held high as if to strike a mortal terror into the very air, and down his track a she-wolf drove upon me, a starved horror, ravening and wasted beyond all belief. She seemed a rack for avarice, gaunt and craving. Oh, many the souls she has brought to endless grief. She brought such heaviness upon my spirit at sight of her savagery and desperation. I died from every hope of that high summit, and like a miser, eager in acquisition, but desperate in self-reproach when fortune's wheel turns to the hour of his loss, all tears and attrition, I wavered back, and still the beast pursued, forcing herself against me bit by bit, till I slid back into the sunless wood. And as I fell to my soul's ruin, a presence gathered before me on the discolored air, the figure of one who seemed hoarse from long silence. At sight of him in that friendless waste, I cried, "Have pity on me, whatever thing you are, whether shade or living man." And it replied, not man, though man I once was, and my blood was Lombard, both my parents Mantuan. I was born, though late, sub Julio, and bred in Rome under Augustus in the noon of the false and lying gods. I was a poet and sang of old Anchises' noble son, who came to Rome after the burning of Troy. But you, why do you return to these distresses, instead of climbing that shining mount of joy, which is the seat and first cause of man's bliss? And are you then that Virgil and that fountain of purest speech? My voice grew tremulous. Glory and light of poets, now may that zeal and love's apprenticeship that I poured out on your heroic verses serve me well. For you are my true master and first author, the sole maker from whom I drew the breath of that sweet style whose measures have brought me honor. See there, immortal sage, the beast I flee. For my soul's salvation, I beg you, guard me from her, for she has struck a mortal terror through me. And he replied, seeing my soul in tears, he must go by another way who would escape this wilderness, for that mad beast that flees before you there suffers no man to pass. She tracks down all, kills all, and knows no glut, but feeding she grows hungrier than she was. She mates with any beast, and will mate with more, before the greyhound comes to hunt her down. He will not feed on lands nor loot, but honor and love and wisdom will make straight his way. He will rise between Feltro and Feltro, and in him shall be the resurrection and new day of that sad Italy for which Nisus died, and Turnus, and Euryalus, and the maid Camilla. He shall hunt her through every nation of sick pride, till she is driven back forever to hell, whence envy first released her on the world. Therefore, for your own good, I think it well you follow me, and I will be your guide, and lead you forth through an eternal place. There you shall see the ancient spirits tried in endless pain, and hear their lamentation, as each bemoans the second death of souls. Next you shall see upon a burning mountain souls in fire, and yet content in fire, knowing that whensoever it may be, they yet will mount into the blessed choir, to which, if it is still your wish to climb, a worthier spirit shall be sent to guide you. With her shall I leave you, for the King of Time, who reigns on high, forbids me to come there, since living I rebelled against his law. He rules the waters and the land and air, and there holds court his city and his throne. Oh, blessed are they he chooses, and I to him, poet by that God to you unknown. Lead me this way, beyond this present ill, and worse to dread, lead me to Peter's gate, and be my guide through the sad halls of hell. And he then follow, and he moved ahead in silence, and I followed where he led. So that's the end of the first canto, and it's basically setting the stage for this kind of epic pilgrimage through hell and onto purgatory and finally to paradise. And basically, uh, it's describing the encounter between Dante and the spirit or shade of the great Latin Roman poet Virgil, who's kind of his idol and his mentor, who's basically explaining that he's not going to be able to take him through all the way to paradise because having been a pagan and been born before Christianity, he's not allowed to escort him all the way. And there's also this kind of allegorical reference to these three beasts that represent three mortal sins: the leopard and the lion, and the um, the greyhound. That's sort of um, representing like gluttony and all these kind of different avarices and sins. So yeah, and it also really helps to have the context of what Dante went through in his own life, which is being exiled from Florence because of trumped up charges. Because there was a conflict between these two different political factions at the time, the white Guelphs and the black Guelphs, and Dante was on the white side. And when the black Guelphs win, they sort of concocted a phony excuse to they ordered him to pay a fine that he refused to pay, and he ended up being exiled and that sort of pain of that experience kind of factors into the story, and this kind of lifelong love that he had for this woman, Beatrice, also is a huge part of it. So it really is just amazing the way the story works in all these aspects of his own experience and his own life. That it's sort of theological. It's something deeply personal. It's a love story at the same time. So I just think that it's incredible that there's so many dimensions to this work that can still speak to us so powerfully, so many centuries, almost 1,000 years after it was originally published. And I think it will always. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. It's never going to stop resonating. I'm sure hundreds of years from now, it'll still be being read and studied. And I'll come back to it later, maybe tomorrow, and continue to read more from the work because all of it is worth reading. And especially, in our own time when there's so much uncertainty and there's so much to be things that there's so much fear, and I find myself turning to a work that even though it's ostensibly about a journey through hell, it offers sort of a cathartic promise that there is something, that we can overcome our challenges, and there's a way out of whatever darkness we may be going through. And so that's all I wanted to say.